Not only do I feel a sense of urgency to prepare and preserve food, I feel compelled to share it with you. I'm doing a lot of canning right now, so I'm going to bring you along as I make these 7 quarts of beef stew. I've added the necessary amount of water for this canner, and I'm testing out a new electric burner. I want to stop using this all-American canner on my glass top stove because when it's filled with food, it really gets close to the max limit, and I don't want my stove to break. Happy to say it worked beautifully. I have the ingredients ready for the jars. This is the beef stew meat, which will get really tender during the pressure canning process. Chunks of potatoes, carrots, which I don't mind saying I took a shortcut and bought baby carrots that were already peeled. All I did was rinse them. Of course, onions. A little goes a long way. In pressure canning, all flavors get super concentrated. Salt, and you'll see I add pepper later. Last but not least, some garlic powder. First, I'm going to add the beef stew meat to the jars. I just bought 1 pack of stew meat this time. I'm just going to divide what's here amongst the 7 jars. There's no specific ratio you have to follow, like this much meat, this much potato. It's all going to process for the same amount of time. In this jar, the beef has the longest processing time, which is for a quart, 90 minutes. So that means everything in the jar has to process for 90 minutes. I'm just gently pressing down on the chunks of beef to make more room in the jar. As you'll see, it runs out of space really quickly. Before I start adding the potatoes, I'm going to switch out this glove for a new one. I started off by adding a few potatoes to each jar. I want to use up the potatoes if possible, but I don't want to go overboard and not leave room for the carrots and onions. After the first round, it looked like there was enough room, so I went ahead and added the rest. Now I'm going to add the carrots. It was such a time saver not having to peel and chop carrots myself. Now it's time to add the onions. If you're new to canning, then you need to know that every recipe you follow tells you how much headspace to leave at the top. This beef stew requires a 1-inch headspace, and this tool helps me measure 1 inch from the top of the jar to the top of the food or liquid. That's all the food going in the jar. Now I can add my seasoning. I love my food well seasoned, but with pressure canning, I've learned that less is definitely more. All flavors become super concentrated during the pressure canning process. I added a teaspoon of sea salt to each jar, about a half teaspoon of garlic powder, and basically a pinch of black pepper. Now it's time to add water to the jars. Some people like to add beef broth, but I think it's a waste of beef broth because the beef in the jar and the water are going to turn into broth. It's not considered a safe practice to add thickeners to jars when you're canning, so when you're making something like beef stew, you will thicken it once you open the jar to eat it. Remember that red tool I used to measure my headspace? The other end of it serves a purpose as well. It's called a debubbler. Once I put it down into the jar, it'll help to release trapped air that's stuck at the bottom. This is a really important step because when you release those air bubbles, the water is going to fill in those gaps and you may need to top it off. I typically add a little bit more liquid than necessary because I know once this step happens, the level is going to change. I'm checking my headspace one more time. Then I'm going to grab a little bowl of distilled vinegar and a paper towel so I can clean the rims of the jars. This is also a really important step because the rims of the jars where I'm cleaning is exactly where the lid is going to seal to the jar. Wiping the rims with vinegar like this ensures that there's no oil or anything else that's going to get in the way of a good seal. I dump the rest of the vinegar right in the pot of water. This prevents hard water deposits from forming on the jars. Now it's time to put the lids and rings on the jars, and if you've learned nothing else in canning, there's a tool for everything. This is a magnetic lid lifter. Normally I do this with 2 hands, 1 hand to lift it, the other hand to hold it in place while I remove the magnet, but I had the camera in my other hand. Now I'm going to add the rings, and I'm only going to make them fingertip tight. Basically what that means is I spin it around until it stops, and then I use my fingers to tighten it up more. Now it's time to get the jars in the pressure canner. I started off using this jar lifter, but then I realized this pot is not hot. I can use my hand. Cool water in my jar, cool water in the pot. No threat of anything cracking. Never mix hot and cold. This canner requires a very light layer of oil to go around the rim of either the pot or the lid. Sometimes I do both. You do this so the lid doesn't get stuck because there is no rubber gasket. This is a metal on metal connection. Now I can get my lid on, get everything locked down, and turn the burner on. Then at that point, I'm just waiting for the pot to heat up enough that it starts to vent steam. And once it vents steadily for 10 minutes, I can add my weight regulator. Because my altitude is less than 1,000 feet, I have to pressure can at 10 pounds of pressure. So the weight regulator I use has different sides. I use the side for 10 pounds. Now pressure will build inside the canner. I'll wait for my weight regulator to start to jiggle 1 to 4 times a minute. Then I'll set my timer for 90 minutes. I'll be back when it's done. It was jiggling a little too much, so I turned it down a tiny bit. No matter how long I've been canning, I always keep my instruction booklet close by. I'm always triple checking times and head spaces and all the things just to be on the safe side. Meanwhile, I'm loading my dishwasher with a bunch of mason jars I'm going to need for all the broth I'm about to can. The 90-minute processing time is all done, so I can turn the burner off and let the pot cool off. Once the gauge shows that the pressure is at 0, I'll take the weight regulator off and then let it sit for 10 more minutes before I take the lid off. Pressure is down to 0. I'm going to go ahead and remove the weight regulator, but it is hot, so I have on an oven mitt. After letting it sit for 10 minutes, I can go ahead and get the lid off. Once I get these unscrewed, when I lift the lid, I'm going to make sure I lift it away from me so steam does not come up in my face. These jars of beef stew are done. Now I have to use my jar lifter because everything is super hot. I'm going to carefully place all the jars on the counter on top of a kitchen towel. Now it's time to experience that satisfying moment when a jar seals and the little button on top pops in. And this is what the final jars look like. It smells amazing. As you can see, it's still super hot. There's still boiling happening in the jars. I'm going to leave these alone for 24 hours. After that, I'll remove the rings, give the jars a rinse, label and date them, and then put them on the shelf. Hopefully this inspires you to do some canning of your own. If canning isn't for you, there's other ways to preserve food. Get into it. It's kind of fun, actually. If you're still here, thanks for watching. I did want to add one more thing. When I'm making beef stew on top of the stove, I do season and brown my beef before putting it back in the pot to stew it down and get it all nice and tender. And you can totally do that if you want to. I don't feel it's necessary. When it comes to canning, my mindset is a little different than a regular everyday dinner. I just want something that's in a jar already cooked, preserved, and that tastes really good.